Good morning, friends. It's Mr. Casey here. I'm back in my office this week because it is cold and windy outside. But I want to share the next part of our story of God's family with you all today. So I hope you're doing well, and I hope that you're enjoying these stories, friends. Now, of course, I brought my story bag with me so I can tell you the next part of the story. My bag is getting so heavy, friends. There's so much stuff in here that has helped us tell this special story the last few weeks. I know that you recognize some of these special things that remind us of parts of the story that we've already talked about. Ah, yes, our hammer. God's family worked for the king of Egypt, but the king didn't treat them fairly, did he? And so God sent Moses through the burning bush to go and rescue his people. And God's family was set free, and they went on a long, long journey. Remember our map? Everywhere they went on their journey, God gave his family everything they needed. Food, water, shelter. Always took care of them. Last week, friends, you might remember the special gift that God gave his family, that God gave to Moses on top of the mountain. God's special words that Moses could keep forever and ever, that he could look at whenever he was in trouble. And God's family made that special promise together, didn't they? God's family promised to always listen to God's special words. Well, friends, you remember how last week in our story, how we talked about that Moses and God met at the tippy top of a great big tall mountain. Well, while they were up at the top of the mountain, around the bottom of the mountain, God's family camped out in their tents and huddled around their campfires, and they waited. And they waited for days and days for Moses to come back. But it took a long time, friends. And I don't know about you, but I have trouble waiting for things sometimes. I get impatient. And God's family began to get really impatient as they waited and waited for Moses to come down the mountain. You know what they started to say, friends? They started to say, hey, maybe we don't even need Moses anymore anyway. And maybe we don't need God either. In fact, let's make our own God. Now, friends, this was not a good idea. God's words had said, do not make other gods. Only worship the true God. But God's family did not listen. What they did was they took a big jar, even bigger than this, and they passed it around. And all of the people put in their special gold earrings. You might have some special jewelry at home that's gold or silver or some other pretty color. Or maybe your mom or dad has something special that they wear when they get dressed up. God's family collected their gold earrings in a big jar. And you know what happens with gold when you can heat it up and you can actually shape it into different things. And so that's what God's family did with their gold earrings. They melted them down over a hot, hot fire, and they shaped the gold into the shape of a bull, a big, strong bull. You guys know what a bull is. We live in Texas. A bull is like a cow with horns. And do you know what the people said when they held up their bull, this golden statue that they had made out of their gold earrings? You know what they said? They said, this bull rescued us from Egypt. Friends, you know the story of God's family. You've been listening. You know this story well. Who rescued God's family from Egypt? Was it a big golden bull? No, it was God and God's special helper Moses. But the people, they had forgotten about all that, friends. And they decided to create for themselves this new God. And they bowed down and worshipped it. Friends, this was not a good idea. And God's family did not listen to God's special words. And you know what happens, friends, when God's family does not listen to God's special words? You remember the other side of these tablets. God gives us his words because he loves us. But when God's family doesn't listen, guess what happens? God's heart is broken. God's heart was broken, friends, when his family worshipped another God. Now, friends, eventually, God's family, they realized what they did was wrong. And do you know what we say, friends, when we realize that we've done something wrong? What do you say when you've maybe hurt someone's feelings with something you've said or done? That's right. We say, I'm sorry. And that's what God's family said. They said, we are sorry. What we have done is wrong. And they were afraid, friends. They were scared because they wondered if God would forgive them. They wondered if God would still love them and if they could still be God's special family, even though they had done something very wrong. But do you know what, friends? God always forgives. God always forgives his family whenever they do anything wrong. And God forgave the people for making the golden bull. He said, of course I forgive you. And of course you are still my family. And of course I still love you. And I'll always keep my promises to you. This is a special part of the story, friends. I hope you'll think more about that. And next week, I get to tell you the next bit of our story when God's family comes to their new home. Very excited about that as well. Thanks for listening today, friends. If you have an activity pack, now is the time to get it out to do today's activity. Thanks for joining us for another week of Kids Club. I will see you guys again next week. Goodbye.